Everyone in the train felt it when he stepped in. The shift. The invisible weight of a man who had spent 14 years making Seoul answer to him. Shoulders straightened. Eyes dropped. Conversations lowered themselves without anyone deciding to lower them. Every person, except her. She turned a page. Just turned a page. Like he was weather. Like he was the sound of the train. Like he was absolutely, completely no one special. And Kang Ji-hoon, who had never in his adult life been looked through, stood there in his silence, in his power, in his 14-year armor, and felt it crack. He didn't understand it. He told himself it was curiosity, a psychological anomaly, something to be filed and forgotten. He took the same train the next morning, and the morning after that. She never looked up, and he never stopped coming back. What happens when the most untouchable man in the city meets the one woman completely unbothered by his existence? Stay with me, because this story will rearrange something in you. Welcome to the Soul Affection, where every story touches the heart. Every moment feels real, and love is never just simple. It's deep, complicated, and unforgettable. Subscribe to our channel as it keeps us motivated to do more. This will be the only time I ask, so do it now. Thank you. He had never chased anything in his life. Not a case, not a client, not a woman. In 14 years of building one of Seoul's most feared corporate litigation firms from a single rented desk in Mapogu to a glass tower in Gangnam, Kang Ji-hoon had operated on a single principle: move correctly and the right things come toward you. He had never been wrong about this. Until the woman from Accra sat down in the seminar room on the 14th floor of his building and opened a notebook that had nothing to do with him, and something in his chest shifted with the specific, quiet violence of a fault line adjusting. He didn't understand it immediately. He was not a man given to misunderstanding things, which made the confusion more disorienting than it might have been for someone with more practice at being confused. He filed it. He returned to the presentation. He told himself it was anomaly. He was wrong. But that understanding would take weeks to arrive. Abina Mensah had come to Seoul for 6 months. She was 31, a trade law consultant from Accra, seconded to a joint West African, East Asian Policy Research Initiative, a newly funded project examining cross-border investment frameworks between the two regions. Her role was specific: document the gaps, find the structural failures, write the report that told the truth clearly enough that governments might actually do something with it. She had done this kind of work for 4 years. She was very good at it. She was also very good at being unknown in new cities, which was not a skill she had cultivated so much as one that had grown naturally from the particular combination of being observant, self-contained, and deeply uninterested in performing herself for rooms that hadn't earned the performance. Seoul was her 3rd posting in 2 years. Before this, Nairobi, then Brussels. Each city had tried, in its own way, to make her into a version of herself it could more easily categorize. Each city had failed. Seoul, she suspected, would also fail. But it would fail in more interesting ways. She boarded the Line 2 subway on her 3rd morning in the city, found a window seat, and opened her policy documents. Around her, the city moved through its Tuesday with the specific density of 10 million people, who had collectively decided that efficiency was a form of survival. She did not notice the man on the train. She noticed the air pressure change when he stepped in. She catalogued it under weather, possibly, and returned to the document. Kang Ji-hoon had taken the subway that morning because his driver had a family emergency, and he had, in a moment of uncharacteristic flexibility, decided the inconvenience was manageable. He stood with one hand loosely on the overhead bar, reading emails on his phone, processing the morning with the automatic efficiency of someone who had long ago learned to turn dead time into productive time. He saw her when he boarded. She was 3 seats diagonal, facing slightly away, reading something. Printed physical pages, annotated in 2 colors, which told him she was serious about whatever she was reading. She wore a deep rust-colored coat. Over dark clothes, her braids pinned up, her posture straight not from tension but from habit. The way people held themselves when good posture had stopped requiring thought. She did not look up. He looked away. He looked back. She was still reading. In 14 years of practice, in 14 years of reading rooms and people and the language between what faces showed and what they meant, Kang Ji-hun had never been the kind of man to look twice. He looked 3 times that morning and then looked at the door and forced his attention back to his email, which had not become more interesting. In the interval, at Gangnam Station, she gathered her papers with the unhurried precision of someone who had memorized the train's rhythm, stood, and walked off, without once looking in his direction. He got off at his stop 2 stations later. He thought about her for the rest of the day, which was inconvenient, because he had 3 hearings and a board deposition, and none of them were improved by the recurrence of rust-colored coat and annotated documents in the margins of his focus. He told himself it was simply the anomaly of someone who hadn't reacted to him. He took the same train the next morning. She was in the same seat. He stood in the same spot. She didn't look up. By the 5th morning, he had stopped inventing reasons. He was there because she was there. That was the complete truth of it. And Kang Ji-hun, who had spent a career stripping arguments down to their essential, irreducible core, recognized a core truth when he was standing in one. He learned her rhythms without asking for them. The way she switched between documents, always the annotated one first, then the cleaner copy. As if she read once for feeling and once for record. The way she tilted her head when something surprised her, not dramatically, just a fraction. The way a compass needle adjusted. The way she always, without fail, looked out the window at the Han River crossing, not at the city, at the water specifically, as if she was checking something against it. He did not speak to her. He had no architecture for it yet. He was a man who prepared before he moved, and he was still in the stage of understanding what he was dealing with. What he was dealing with was a woman who existed in a city that moved at maximum velocity, as if she had found a frequency the city couldn't reach. Not cold, he could see from the way she occasionally smiled at something in her documents that there was considerable warmth operating somewhere underneath the surface, but contained, self-sufficient in a way that was not performance. It was the rarest thing he had encountered in a life defined by the reading of people. 3 weeks passed. On a Thursday morning, the carriage was fuller than usual. Abina had been in Seoul long enough to sense a delay before it was announced, and she registered the additional bodies with the mild recalibration of someone adjusting to changed conditions. The man who sat beside her, she was aware of him as a type before he spoke, had the particular energy of someone who had confused confidence with entitlement and had not yet been corrected. "You work near Gangnam," he said, in English clearly aimed at her foreignness, the assumption that she couldn't possibly be reading Korean policy documents. She looked up slowly, looked at him, looked back down. "Yes," she said, in Korean, clean and accented and precise, and returned to her document. He laughed as if she had said something inviting. "I'm Park Sang-yoon, finance sector." "You?" "Busy," she said, without looking up. He leaned slightly into her space, not touching, but angling the way certain men angled when they wanted to make the air feel claimed. "Are you always like this, or is it just mornings?" She turned a page. "I could show you the city," he said. "Properly. Not the foreigner route." From 3 seats diagonal, Kang Ji-hun had gone very still. He had been still before. Stillness was his natural state. But this was a different quality, not the stillness of a man at rest, but the stillness of a man who had arrived at a decision and was measuring the precise moment to deliver it. He watched. He waited. He gave her 30 seconds because he had watched her for 3 weeks and he knew she was entirely capable of handling anything, and he would not insult that capability by moving before she needed him to. She turned another page. Her expression did not change, but her jaw had. The particular set of someone expending controlled effort on patients they were running low on. When the man reached over and touched the edge of her printed document, the annotated one, the one she handled with the specific care of something that mattered, and said, "Just tell me your name." Ji-hun stood up. He didn't rush. He walked the 5 steps between his position and their row with the particular unhurried quality of a man for whom urgency had never been necessary, because everything he moved toward understood instinctively that it should wait. He stopped beside the man. Did not look at him immediately. Looked at Abina first, checking quietly that she was fine, that her expression was controlled, that she was managing but tired. Then he turned and looked down at Park Sang-yoon. Whatever he saw in Kang Ji-hun's face made the practiced confidence dissolve into something considerably more animal. "No one speaks to her," Ji-hun said quietly. Once, in the specific tone of a man who had never needed volume to carry consequence. The man stood up 7 seconds later and moved to the far end of the carriage without another word. Ji-hun returned to his position by the overhead bar. The carriage had gone quiet, with the particular quality of people who had understood something and chosen, wisely, not to examine it aloud. Abina stared at her document for 11 full seconds. Then she looked up. Across the carriage, Kang Ji-hun was facing the window. He did not turn, did not acknowledge her gaze, simply stood there, still and self-contained, as if what he had just done was so ordinary it required no recognition. She looked back at her papers. Read the same line 4 times. The words did not land once. At Gangnam Station, she stood, gathered her documents, walked to the doors. Just before she stepped off the train, she stopped, turned fractionally toward where he stood. "Gamawoyo," she said quietly. "Thank you." In Korean. Careful and deliberate. He turned then. Just slightly. Just enough. Up close, the first time she had looked directly at him, his face was not what the periphery had suggested. Not harder. More present. The face of someone who had spent a long time managing how much of himself was visible and had, in this moment, lowered something. His eyes were dark and even, and watching her with the kind of attention that didn't look away because it had no reason to. "It wasn't a favor," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. It was a correction. She held his gaze for 2 beats, then stepped off the train. The doors closed. Kang Ji-hun stood in the moving carriage for another 4 stops before he realized he had missed his station by 3, which had not happened to him in 14 years of moving through the world with perfect precision. He stood and stared at the city outside the window, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like a man who did not know what came next. It was the most alive he had felt in years. The following week, things changed in ways that were small and irreversible. Abina noticed the absence of trouble first. Not on the train, on the street. 2 men who had made her Thursday evening walk from the language cafe in Mapo uncomfortable for 3 consecutive weeks were simply not there. She had no explanation for it. She filed it under coincidence and left it there because the alternative required a conversation with herself she wasn't prepared to have. On Thursday morning, he spoke first. "You read physical documents," he said, from 3 seats diagonal. Not an opener. An observation, delivered like evidence. She turned a page. "I annotate better." Silence. "Kang Ji-hun," he said. She did not look up for 12 seconds. Then, "Abina." He said nothing after that. She said nothing after that. The train moved. Seoul passed the window in its usual indifferent speed. But when she stepped off at her station that morning, the back of her neck was warm in a way the November air made entirely impossible to Explain, and she walked 3 blocks before she noticed she had gone the wrong direction. By the second week of names, they had graduated to sentences. Him telling her, without being asked, that the delay at City Hall Station was a water main issue, not a signal fault, which he knew because he had been involved in the litigation around the maintenance contract 3 years ago. Her asking why a corporate lawyer was involved in infrastructure. Him saying, with the complete absence of self-importance she was learning to recognize as characteristic. Because the family that owned the subcontracting company needed someone who wouldn't be intimidated into a settlement. A pause. They got a fair one instead. She processed this information over 2 days. She was used to powerful men who mentioned their power. She was not used to men who mention their power only as context for someone else's outcome. She wrote about it in the second section of her second notebook, under the heading she had created 2 weeks ago and had not examined too closely. Variables requiring further observation. You know which building I work in, she said one morning, not accusingly, but with the level directness of someone who dealt in precision and required it in return. He did not look away. Yes. How long have you known? The 3rd morning, he said. I recognized the firm's logo on your document folder. And you didn't say anything. It wasn't relevant to say. She turned this over. What made it relevant now? You asked, he said. Things become relevant when they're asked for. Before that, they're just information. She stared at him for a long moment. Outside, Seoul moved through its morning. A man across the aisle was eating something that smelled like sesame and watching a drama on his phone with no headphones. Someone near the door had a paper coffee cup with a drawing of a bear on it. All of it was so ordinary. And the man 3 seats diagonal was watching her with eyes that were so completely, unapologetically present that the ordinary thing she did with her hands, turning the page, required actual thought. You don't try very hard to seem harmless, she said. No, he agreed. I don't. Is that intentional? He considered this. I think people who try hard to seem harmless are usually making a case for something. I'm not making a case. He looked at her steadily. You'll reach your own verdict regardless. She reached her station. Got up. At the door, without turning. You should know that my verdicts are accurate. She stepped off. Behind her, and she didn't see this, Kang Ji-hun watched the doors close with the particular expression of a man who had just heard something that confirmed what he already knew and felt the confirmation land somewhere deep and permanent. He found her outside her building one evening, not waiting. She understood the distinction now, simply present on the corner in the specific way of a man who existed in spaces rather than occupying them. There's a restaurant, he said, without preamble. 15 minutes from here. The owner is from Senegal. The food is West African. It's been there for 6 years and most people in Seoul don't know about it. She looked at him. How do you know about it? I represented his lease dispute 4 years ago. Did he win? He's still there, Ji-hun said. She looked at the street. She looked at him. She did the internal calculation she always did, the one she had been doing all her life in rooms and cities that were not built with her in mind. Threat assessment. Motivation mapping. The geometry of exits. And then she did the thing she almost never did. She stopped calculating. Okay, she said. They walked without urgency. Not the uncomfortable silence of 2 strangers running out of filler, but the easy silence of 2 people who had spent weeks communicating across a subway carriage and had quietly determined that words were, in many ways, the lesser currency. The restaurant was called Teranga, Hospitality in Wolof. Small, warm. The walls painted the color of late afternoon in a way that made Abina feel, unexpectedly and immediately, like something in her chest had been held tightly for 7 months and had just been given permission to release. She ordered in a mix of English and the little Wolof she had picked up from a Dakar posting 2 years ago, which delighted the owner, broad-shouldered man named Musa, who looked at Jihun with a specific, warm recognition of someone who owed a debt they were glad to have. They sat across from each other at a table near the window. She wrapped both hands around a glass of bisap, hibiscus, deep red, cold, and looked at him with the direct clarity she had stopped pretending she wasn't using. "Why me?" she said. He did not perform consideration. He had clearly thought about this already. "Because you were the only person in the carriage who didn't react when I entered," he said. "In 14 years, that has not happened. I needed to understand it. And do you?" "Yes," he said. "You don't give your attention to things that haven't earned it. You're not performing disinterest. You're genuinely," he paused, choosing, selective about what you let matter. She was quiet. "Most people find that cold. Most people want your attention without earning it," he said. "That's not your problem." Outside, Seoul moved through its evening in its usual self-possessed rush. Inside, Abina Mensa sat with a man who had said most people want your attention without earning it, as if it were a simple fact, and felt something she had been managing for months simply stopped being manageable. "I go back to Accra in 4 months," she said. "I know. This," she gestured vaguely at the space between them, "is complicated by that." "Most worthwhile things are complicated," he said. "Complicated isn't the same as wrong." She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. He had learned, or perhaps had always known, that she needed to see things completely before she could trust them. And he had the patience of a man who had never once won anything by rushing. "Tell me something true," she said. "Not strategic." "True." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The train is the only part of my day where I'm not managing something. Every other hour is calculation, case strategy, client management, the endless architecture of consequences." He looked at her steadily. "That started 3 weeks ago. The not managing. And it only started because you were there." The bissap was cold and sweet. Outside, a couple walked past the window, arm in arm, leaning into each other against the November wind. Musa was singing something quietly to himself behind the counter, something that had the cadence of a childhood song. "I'm very bad at needing people," Abina said. "I know," he said. "I'm very bad at showing that I need them." He picked up his glass. "We could be bad at different things." She laughed. It was not a polite laugh or a social laugh. It was the kind that surprised her, that came from below the careful architecture of composed self-presentation, and it transformed her face in a way that made Kang Ji-hun feel like he had been given access to something that was not given lightly. Something rare. Something real. And he received it with the appropriate gravity, which looked, from the outside, like simply looking at her. She walked back toward the station with her shoulder close enough to his arm that the gap between them was almost nothing. Neither of them addressed it. Neither of them widened it. December came to Seoul in the particular way December came to Seoul. Not gently, but with the clean severity of a city that did not believe in soft transitions. The cold arrived with intention. The city lit up with the specific bright excess of a place that understood that the way to answer darkness was loudly. Abina and Ji-hun texted. It began, as things began between two precise people, with something formally neutral. He sent her a link to a policy paper on cross-border investment arbitration that referenced a case she had cited in her draft report. She responded with a correction. The citation was being misused. The case had been overturned on appeal. Here was the correct framework. And somehow by 11 p.m. they were discussing the structural failure of bilateral investment treaties and whether they were fundamentally salvageable or cosmetically broken, and she was laughing at something he had said about a judge who had clearly not read the filing, and he was doing the thing he had learned he did only when talking to her, which was thinking about the next thing he wanted to say rather than the most strategic thing. She told herself it was intellectual companionship. Rare, valuable, bounded. She told herself this for approximately 2 weeks before stopping. Because she was a researcher and researchers did not maintain arguments in the face of evidence. The evidence was she had restructured her commute around the expectation of him. She noticed on the mornings he wasn't on the train, a specific and unproductive absence. She had written his name in the margin of a policy document, not as a note, just written it and then looked at it for a moment before drawing a single line through it, which was not the same as erasing it. She walked into his office building one afternoon on an errand to the law library on the 9th floor and felt, in the lobby, the particular atmospheric change she associated exclusively with his proximity, and turned to find him coming through the main entrance in a dark coat, mid-conversation with a junior associate. He saw her at the exact same moment. And for one unguarded second his entire face changed, not dramatically, not theatrically, just briefly and completely, the practiced composure, shifting to something more immediate and more honest before he recalibrated. She filed that expression in the second notebook and knew she was no longer able to call it a variable. The crisis came in the way crises came, embedded in the ordinary. She was finishing a late session at the National Library on a Wednesday when her phone buzzed with a message from a colleague. Someone had been asking about her. Not institutionally, personally. Questions about her schedule, her address, her connection to Kong Ji-hun specifically from a source linked to a company that had lost a major litigation to his firm 8 months prior. She sat with the message for 4 minutes. She was not a woman who panicked. She was a woman who assessed. She called Ji-hun. He answered on the first ring. "I've seen it," he said. He had apparently seen it before she had. "I'm handling it." "Tell me the shape of it," she said. "Completely." A pause. Then, "Come to my office." She went. He told her things without softening them. The company, the grievance, the specific individuals involved, the nature of the risk, which was real but manageable, and the steps already in motion to make her safe. He was methodical about it, the way he was methodical about everything. But there was something underneath the method, a tension, a care, a quality of controlled concern that he was not, she noticed, attempting to hide. "You're worried," she said. "Yes," he said. He did not perform otherwise. "About me specifically, or the situation?" He looked at her for a moment. "About you," he said. "The situation I can resolve. You are not a problem to be resolved." She was quiet. Outside his office window, Seoul was doing its enormous, illuminated nighttime thing, lights multiplying across the skyline in all directions. "Do I matter to you?" she asked. Directly. Without decoration. Because she had learned that indirect questions got indirect answers, and she had no patience for those. He was very still. The kind of still she had learned, over weeks and months, was not emptiness, but the opposite, fullness, something being felt at a depth that required the surface to go quiet. "Yes," he said. Simply. With no apparatus around it. She exhaled slowly. "Then I need to say something." "Say it." "I came to Seoul to observe. That was my entire relationship to this city, observer. I built that because cities like this one work like mine. They ask you to disappear inside them if you let them. And I have spent a long time making sure I don't disappear." She looked at him. "You are the first thing in 4 years that has made me want to be visible. Not to anyone else. To you." She paused. "That frightens me considerably." He looked at her for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had the quality she had only heard in him on rare occasions, stripped of all professional register. Just a man speaking. "I've been in that office for 9 years. I know every person in this building by name, by case, by the specific quality of their ambition. I have not once, in 9 years, thought about another person in this city the way I think about you." He was quiet. "I don't know what to do with that yet. But I know I'm not interested." in pretending it isn't there. Outside, the city was enormous and indifferent and perfectly itself. Inside, Abina Mensa, who had spent 4 years being an observer, felt the last of the distance she had been maintaining close like a book. She had finished and was setting down. She crossed the room and stood in front of him. She reached up and put her hand flat against his chest, over his heart. She could feel it, not slow, not controlled. Nothing like the composed surface he presented to every room he entered. He covered her hand with his. Said nothing. The city moved outside the window. Neither of them moved. She left for Accra 4 months later on a Saturday morning, the worst day of the week for departures, because Saturdays belong to the living version of Seoul, the market version, the family version, the city at its most warmly, frustratingly human. Leaving it felt more like leaving something alive than leaving a location. Ji-hoon drove her to the airport. They did not fill the hour with words, because they were both, at their core, people who understood that some hours did not need filling. At the departure gate, she turned to him. "I'm not good at long distances," she said. "I know," he said. "I've been told I'm not good at warmth." "You're wrong about that," she said. "You're just economical with it." Something crossed his face, the expression she had first seen in the subway carriage when she'd said thank you in careful Korean. The one. That was not his public face, but the one underneath it. The real topography of him. 6 weeks, he said. "I'll be in Accra in 6 weeks. There's a client in West Africa I've been putting off." "Is that true?" He looked at her steadily. "There will be," he said. "By the time I land." She laughed. He looked at her laughing and received it, the way he always received it, with the particular gravity of a man who understood. He was being given something rare. She picked up her bag. "Ji-hoon," she said. "Yes. Don't make me wait longer than 6 weeks." 5, he said. She turned and walked through the gate. He stood in the airport until her flight was listed as departed. Then he drove back into Seoul, which was still enormous, still indifferent, and seemed, in some way he could not have explained, in the courtroom language that governed most of his life, fundamentally changed. He arrived in Accra in 38 days. She met him at the airport herself, which she had told herself she wouldn't do, because it was too much, too visible, too much of herself on display in an open space. She was there anyway. She had known she would be. He came through the arrival's door with one bag and no entourage and found her standing exactly where she was standing and looked at her with the eyes she had learned over months and thousands of kilometers to read. The ones that went very still when he felt something at a depth he had decided to stop containing. "You came," she said. "I told you 5 weeks," he said. "You're 3 days early." He looked at her. "I know." Accra was loud and golden around them. Different from Seoul, warmer. In every sense. The air itself different. The light more generous. The city operating on rhythms that Seoul could not have imagined. He stood in it the way she had stood in Seoul, as a visitor. Uncertain, learning the frequency. "I'll show you the city," she said. "Properly. Not the visitor route." His expression did not change, but something in his eyes that still complete quality shifted in a way she recognized as the closest he came to joy when he was surprised by it. "I'd like that," he said. She took his bag. He did not protest. They walked out into the Accra afternoon together, and the city received them with the magnificent indifference of cities that have seen every version of two people deciding something, and the sunlight was extraordinary, and neither of them wasted it. Spring came to Seoul the following year on a Tuesday, the way spring came to Seoul, suddenly, without ceremony, as if the city had simply decided overnight that it was done with winter. On that Tuesday, in a cafe in Mapo that had become theirs in the specific way spaces became yours when you returned to them enough. Abina sat across from Kang Ji-hoon and turned a small ring on her left hand with the absent, restless motion of someone still processing that it was there. 3 days since the Han River at dusk. 3 days since she had said yes in a city that had once been foreign and had become, quietly and without her permission, something that felt like a beginning. You keep turning it, he said. It's new, she said. You'll stop, he said. Once it's familiar. She looked at him across the table, still impossible, still the man whose name rearranged rooms, still operating in the gray spaces of a complicated world she only partially saw, and entirely, permanently, irrevocably hers in the way she had stopped arguing against months ago, because the evidence was simply too overwhelming to contest. Ji-hoon, she said. Yes, we're going to be okay. He looked at her with the eyes that had watched her for 3 weeks on a train before he had spoken, that had covered her hand over his heart, that had appeared in an Accra airport 38 days after a departure because 5 weeks had felt like too long. He let it show. All of it. Yes, he said. We are. Outside, Seoul went on being Seoul, fast, cold, brilliant, indifferent. 2 people in a corner cafe window ordered a second round of coffee. The space between them was exactly nothing. The city moved around them like water moving around something fixed. Something that had decided to stay. The ring caught the light and stopped turning. She smiled. He watched her smile and kept it in the place where he kept things that were not strategy, not calculation, not the architecture of winning. The place that had been almost empty for a long time and was now quietly and irreversibly full. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to The Soul Affection, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story, and leave a comment below. We read every single one. More stories are coming, and they will find you right when you need them.